Good afternoon, students. Today's demonstration we are going to discuss about the all the bones of upper limb. So it's like a revision for you. It is not in detail, of course, very briefly about all the bones of the upper limb. So to start with the clavicle. So the clavicle is the first bone of the upper limb. Okay, so it has got a medial end, a lateral end. Okay, so the clavicle is the only long bone which is placed horizontally. Okay, and thereby it presents the medial end, lateral end. The medial end is otherwise called sternal end. The lateral end is otherwise called acromial end. Okay, so the how to identify the medial end? So the medial end you can identify. So it is prismoid in shape. You can see here. So it is a prismoid in shape, and the lateral end is flat. The lateral end is flat. You can see the flat lateral end and the prismoid medial end, otherwise called the sternal end of the clavicle. Okay, so intervening shaft. Okay, so the shaft is very important here. It is the shaft from medial to lateral. It is convexo-concave. Okay, convexo-concave. The convexo-concavity from medial to lateral. So from the medial end to the lateral end. Okay, so and next the shaft has got of course the superior surface, anterior surface, inferior surface, the posterior surface. The inferior surface of the shaft is rough because of the there is a groove here, and also the rough surface close to the medial end. So for the costoclavicular ligament attachment, and the groove for the subclavius muscle, and very important tubercle, what is called conoid tubercle towards the lateral aspect, lateral end of the inferior surface of the clavicle. Okay, so all these features that makes the inferior surface of the clavicle very rough. So with the help of these features, you can identify the rough inferior surface and the smooth superior surface. Of course, anteriorly it is convexo concavity from medial to lateral. Okay, so with these points, you can keep the bone in its anatomical position and the side determination. So this bone belongs to left side. Okay, so my bone, it belongs to left side. So it is because of these features. With the help of these the important features, so we can identify the side determination and the anatomical position of the clavicle. Okay, so the clavicle. So coming to the ligaments attached to the clavicle, so we have costoclavicular ligament. So you can see here, so there is a rough area close to the medial end, inferior surface. So that gives attachment to the costoclavicular ligament. And towards the lateral end, so there is a you can see the two parts here. So that is there is a ligament called a coracoclavicular ligament. So it has got two parts, the conoid part, trapezoid point. Okay, these two parts that attach to the lateral end of the inferior surface of the clavicle. So apart from these two ligaments, so we have the interclavicular ligament. So that connects the opposite bone. So on the other side, of course, it lies in the midline. It lies in the midline. So what is that ligament called? Interclavicular ligament. Okay, so these are the ligaments so attached to the clavicle. So if you see the muscular attachments, the important muscles, sternocleidomastoid muscle here, the anterior surface, and this part, pectoralis major. And here comes so you can see here the deltoideus muscle. It is attached over the lateral and anterior surface. So here comes the trapezius. Okay, the trapezius muscle. So these are all the muscles attached to the clavicles and within the groove. So very important, subclavian groove. So there comes the subclavius muscle. Subclavius muscles. So these are all the points to recollect. So for the clavicle bone. And very important points. So the clavicle has got peculiarities. Hope you know the peculiarities of the clavicle. So it is a long bone. It is placed horizontally in the body, and also it has got two primary ossification centers, and occasionally so it is pierced by the intermediate supraclavicular nerve, of course, because this is a dermal bone. It is a dermal bone. So that is the reason the intermediate supraclavicular, it pierces the clavicle occasionally. Okay, so these are all the peculiarities of clavicle. So recollect the points and the important points. Okay, so we have to stress on these points at the time of viva. Okay, so that's about the clavicle. Hope you understand how to keep the bone in its anatomical position and determine the side. Okay, so that's about the clavicle. And of course the junction between the medial 2/3 and lateral 1/3 is very important. So where the clavicular fractures are common. Okay, so medial 2/3 and lateral 1/3 junction between these two. Okay, so this area, so the clavicular fractures are common, and of course very important bone, so that transmits the weight okay, from the upper limb, from the appendicular skeleton to the axial skeleton. Of course, this side it articulates with the sternum, thereby forming sternoclavicular joint, and the lateral end articulates with the acromion process of the scapula, therefore acromioclavicular joint. So through these joints, the weight is being transmitted to the axial skeleton. That is also a very important function of the clavicle. The weight from the appendicular skeleton is transmitted to the axial skeleton through the clavicle, and also it keeps the upper limb away from the trunk, so that you can swing the upper limb at the time of walking. So that is briefly about the clavicle. So go through the textbooks, read the muscular attachments once again, and the shaft. Okay, it is convexo, concave from medial to lateral. Okay, forwards. Okay, forward convexity, and then followed by the concavity. Okay, so that is very important. So thereby you can identify the anatomical position. That's about the clavicle. So the next bone. So we have the next bone in the upper limb. So that is scapula. So you can see the scapula here. So this is a flat bone. It is an example for the flat bone. So it has got the anterior surface, what is called the ventral surface, otherwise called subscapular fossa, which is concave. The concave subscapular fossa or the ventral surface is very important. And if you see the posterior surface or dorsal surface is convex and presents a spine. So what is this spine called? The spinous process of the scapula. So divides the dorsal surface into supraspinous fossa, infraspinous fossa, but there is only one fossa over the dorsal ventral aspect of the scapula. What is this called? Subscapularis fossa. Okay, and it has got three angles. You can see this angle is called the superior angle, and this is called the lateral angle. Okay, and this is called the inferior angle. Okay, three angles here. You can see these three angles. The superior angle. Okay, and the borders here. So we have upper border. This is medial border, and here comes the lateral border. So we have the lateral angle and lateral border. Okay, so that's about the three borders, three angles of the scapula. So of course, the anterior concavity and the posterior convexity presenting the spinous process. And this, apart from the borders and the angles, the scapula has got the spinous process, coracoid process, and here comes the acromion process. So what is this process called? This is acromion process, and this is coracoid process. Okay, and here comes the spinous process. What is this called? Spinous process. Okay, so three processes, three angles, of course three borders of the scapula. Okay, and this surface, ventral surface, otherwise called the costal surface. This is otherwise called vertebral surface. And we have the lateral medial borders, which is thin comparatively the lateral border. You can see the thick lateral border. Okay, and the muscular attachments, the important muscles, coracoid process is otherwise very important, otherwise called it is example for the atavistic epiphysis. You can see the coracoid process, the beak-like projection. And very important, if you see the lateral angles, there comes a shallow depression, what is called glenoid cavity. You can see the glenoid cavity. So above the glenoid cavity, so we have tubercle, what is called supraglenoid tubercle, and below the glenoid cavity, so we have infraglenoid tubercle. Supraglenoid, infraglenoid tubercles gives attachment to the long head of biceps and long head of the triceps respectively. And of course, coming to the coracoid process, the tip of the coracoid process, we have the conjoined tendons of the short head of the biceps and coracobrachialis, and of course this area it gives attachment to the pectoralis minor. Okay, the pectoralis minor insertion and the origin of the biceps, the short head of the biceps and the coracobrachialis from the tip of the coracoid process. And this area, this process, what is called acromion process. You can see the acromion process. So the acromion process, okay, if you trace medially, it continues over the crest of the spine. The spine has called crest and root. You can see this is called root of the spine, this is called crest of the spine. The crest continues with the acromion process. So the upper lip of the crest, it gives attachment to the trapezius, and the lower lip of the crest, it gives attachment to posterior fibers of the deltoid. The root of the spine, so very important, it corresponds in the midline the spine of the third thoracic vertebra. It corresponds to the spine of the third thoracic vertebra. So that's about the root of the spine, spinous process of the scapula. Okay, and one more important notch here, spinoglenoid notch. You can see the notch here, so that communicates. Okay, through this notch, the supraspinous fossa, it communicates with the infraspinous fossa, through which the suprascapular vessels and nerves. Okay, it reaches the infraspinous fossa, thereby it supplies the infraspinatus. And very important in relation to the upper border, so there comes the notch here, suprascapular notch. Of course, in some bones it is suprascapular foramen. Okay, so that transmits the suprascapular vessels and nerves. Okay, so close to the suprascapular notch, there comes the attachment of a vomohyoid, the origin of the vomohyoid. So there is muscle called the inferior belly of vomohyoid, that attaches to the close to the suprascapular notch. And what is this called? Spinoglenoid notch. Okay, so the other important muscles attachments, so they just go through the textbook. So go the medial border, it gives attachment to the main layers. So we have the rhomboidus minor, rhomboidus major. Okay, and the close to the superior angle, so you have levator scapulae, and the inferior angle, so there comes the latissimus dorsi. The lateral border gives rhomboidus above downwards. So we have teres minor, teres major. So those muscles that comes here. So here comes the infraspinatus, here comes the supraspinatus. Okay, and the subscapularis. You can see the subscapularis, and very important. So this is very important. You can see here this one, serratus anterior. Okay, serratus anterior. So this bone belongs to a left side bone. You can see the with the help of the lateral angle, so presenting the glenoid cavity, it is directed upwards, and we have the spine posteriorly. Okay, the dorsal aspect spine, and so thereby you can keep the bone in its anatomical position. This belongs to left side. Okay, you see the medial border, it's very important. The close to the inner surface of the medial border or the ventral surface, so that receives the serratus anterior muscle. The serratus anterior muscle, it is attached to the medial border, not to the lateral border. Okay, it is attached to the lateral medial border. You can see here very nicely. See this line. So there is a attachment of the serratus anterior muscle. Okay, so that's about the scapula. Okay, the anatomical position, and said this bone belongs to left side. Okay, so I have to remember. So anterior, the ventral surface is concave. The posterior surface, always remember, it presents the spine, and this is the angle. Okay, the lateral angle with the shallow depression, what is called glenoid cavity, articulates with the head of the humerus, derived from the glenohumeral joint. Okay, so that's about the scapula bone. Okay, so go through the textbooks, read in detail about the scapula, the attachments, the muscles attached to the scapula, and the main process. So you can see here, this is the acromial angle. So that helps to measure the length of the upper limb. So is measured from this angle. The length of the upper limb is measured from this angle, what is called acromial angle. So that is the significance of the acromial process, and of course the coracoid process is an example for the atavistic epiphysis. So that's about the scapula. And coming to the next bone of the upper limb, so we have the humerus. You can see the humerus here. So again, it is a long bone. Of course, it is placed vertically. Okay, so unlike the clavicle, which is placed horizontally, so here there comes the long bone, which is placed vertically. So it has got upper end, lower end, of course intervening shaft. Okay, so you can see here, so this is the upper end of the humerus, presenting the head. You can see the head of the humerus. Okay, so the head followed by the constricted area, what is called a neck. So what is this neck here called? Anatomical neck. So this is anatomical neck of the humerus, and this head articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula, thereby forming the glenohumeral joint, commonly called shoulder joint. So just below the head, the constricted area is called neck. It is otherwise called anatomical neck. Okay, so apart from the head, neck, so we have two tubercles here. So you can see this is the lesser tubercle, and this is the greater tubercle. Okay, so in between these two tubercles there is a groove here, what is called intertubercular sulcus, otherwise called bicipital groove. So that larges the long head of the biceps brachiae, so that rests on supraglenoid tubercle. Okay, so that's about the upper end. Mainly, so we have the head, anatomical neck, the greater tubercle, lesser tubercle. The greater tubercle that gives so that receives mainly sit, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Okay, so this is supraspinatus, three muscles, and the lesser tubercle that receives the subscapularis. You can see here subscapularis muscle to the lesser tubercle. And so this part of the humerus is just below the upper end. Okay, so this part is called surgical neck of the humerus. So this surgical neck of the humerus, it is bounded by the circumflex humeral nerve, otherwise called axillary nerve. Of course, the fractures are prone at this area. That's why it is called surgical neck. Okay, surgical neck, and very important nerve winds the surgical neck, what is called circumflex humeral nerve, accompanied with the posterior circumflex humeral vessels. Okay, so that's about the significance of the surgical neck, so wanted by the important nerve there. and that is called surgical neck and anatomical neck. So we have greater tubercle, lesser tubercle, intertubercular sulcus, the head of the humerus. So next coming to the lower end of the humerus. So if you see the lower end of the humerus, okay, so the lower end of the humerus, so that friends mainly you can see the rounded elevation, what is called capitulum. You can see the capitulum here. So this is a capitulum. So that articulates with the head of the radius, thereby forming the humeroradial articulation of the elbow joint. And medial to the capitulum, so there comes the trochlea. You can see here, this is the trochlea. So the trochlea is presenting mainly the two slopy surfaces. So we have the medial slopy surface a little raised, okay, comparatively the lateral slopy surface. So of course these surfaces are called flanges. This we have the medial flange, lateral flange. The medial flange is a little raised, of course. So this is the reason. So there is an angle between the long axis of arm with the long axis of the forearm, what is called a carrying angle. Okay. So apart from these two, of course, this trochlea articulates with the trochlear notch of the ulnar, thereby forming the humeroulnar articulation of the elbow joint. So that's about the elbow joint formation by the lower end of the humerus with the help of the capitulum, the trochlea. Okay. So we have, so very important okay, elevations. Of course, these are called the epicondyles of the humerus. We have medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle. So the medial epicondyle is more prominent than the lateral epicondyle, and very important, that helps you to okay, determine the side of the bone also. Okay, the side determination, that is with the help of the medial epicondyle, which is more prominent, and the direction of the head in the upper end, so it is directed upwards medially, and so apart from this, so mainly so in front over the lower end of the humerus, we have two small fossae, these depressions, okay, in relation to the capitulum and the trochlea. Above the capitulum, so that is called radial fossa. Okay, above the trochlea, what is called, so this fossa is called coronoid fossa. What is this coronoid fossa? And this is called radial fossa. So these two fossae that accommodates the head of the radius and the coronoid process of the ulna, so in the extreme flexion, so posteriorly there comes one more fossa called olecranon fossa. You can see the olecranon fossa, which is bigger comparatively those two fossae in front. Of course, this accommodates the olecranon process of the ulna in the extreme extension of the elbow joint, Okay, so that is of olecranon fossa, also very important to determine the okay, they keep the anatomical bone in the anatomical position. Okay, so the olecranon fossa posteriorly and the radial fossa, the coronoid fossa anteriorly. The medial epicondyle, which is more prominent medially, so thereby you can bring the bone its anatomical position, side determination. So this bone belongs to right side. So this bone belongs to, so my bone belongs to right side. And very important now, that winds the posterior aspect that goes behind the medial epicondyle, what is called ulnar nerve. Okay, so the ulnar nerve that winds the medial behind the medial epicondyle. Okay, so that's about the lower end. So apart from, is very important, you can see the just above the epicondyle, so the lateral epicondyle, so this ridge is called supracondylar ridges. You can see the so this supracondylar ridge, so laterally, and the medial supracondylar ridge above the medial condyle. So these ridges are very important, that gives attachment to the intermuscular septa. The lateral supracondylar ridge, apart from the intermuscular septa, it gives attachment to the brachioradialis and extensor carpi radialis longus. Okay, and these epicondyles, so the medial epicondyle is considered as a common flexor origin, and the lateral epicondyle is considered as common extensor origin. Okay, so that's about briefly about the lower end and the features or the lower end of the humerus. The supracondylar fractures are also very common in the children. Okay, supracondylar fractures. Okay, and coming to the shaft of the humerus, of course, it is rounded over the upper. Okay, 1/3, and if in the lower 2/3 it is triangular in shape. The shaft has got mainly its anterior border. So we have the medial border, lateral border, and the anterolateral surface. So this anterolateral surface is anteromedial surface, and the posterior surface. The posterior surface is that runs mainly a spiral groove, which is spiral course, what is called radial groove, so that accommodates the radial nerve accompanied with the profunda brachiae vessels that comes in contact with the radial groove. Okay, so three important nerves that are related to the humerus. So we have the axillary nerve, okay, to the surgical neck of the humerus, and the radial nerve in the radial groove, and so behind the medial epicondyle we have ulnar nerve. Okay, so these are the important nerves that are that comes close the intimacy with the bone. So that is humerus. Okay. And coming to the main attachments here, the shaft. So if you trace the intertubercular sulcus downwards, it runs mainly medial lip, lateral lip, of course the floor. Okay, so the medial lip that gives attachment to the teres major, the lateral lip gives attachment to the pectoralis major, and so in between these two there comes the latissimus dorsi. Okay, so latissimus dorsi within the groove. So that's about the attachment of three muscles to the intertubercular sulcus. Intertubercular sulcus. So if you see the there is a inverted V-shaped tuberosity, what is called deltoid tuberosity. So that receives the insertion of the deltoides muscle. Okay, and medially, so here comes this is for the coracobrachialis, the mid shaft of the humerus. So that receives the insertion of the coracobrachialis. Coracobrachialis is very important events that takes place at this level. So that is the events that takes place at the level of insertion of the coracobrachialis or mid shaft of the humerus. Of course, the bony changes, the rounded, okay, the shaft that becomes triangular, okay, and the intermuscular septa are well defined below this level. Okay, so above this level, so the intermuscular septa are ill defined. Okay, and of course there is a the change of the position of the median nerve, and of course in relation to the brachial artery. Okay, brachial arteries, all these events that take place at the level of mid shaft of the humerus, that is at the insertion of the coracobrachialis. So you can see the coracobrachialis here. So posteriorly here comes so above the spiral groove, so we have the lateral head of the triceps. So below the spiral groove, so we have the medial head of the triceps. So medial head of the triceps, which is the deep head also. Okay, of course in between these two heads, so there is the spiral groove, so accommodating the radial nerve and profunda brachii vessels. So that's about the shaft of the humerus, and upper end, lower end, and the anatomical position, side determination of the humerus. So go to the textbooks, read in detail about the muscular attachments and the side determination. Okay, with the help of your bones, try to keep the bone in its anatomical position. That's about the humerus. And the next bone of the, of course, we have the forearm bones. So we have mainly two bones in the forearm. So that is radius and ulna. So the lateral bone is called radius and the medial bone is called ulna. So to start with the radius. So again, the radius is a long bone, so it has got upper end and lower end. The upper end is otherwise called the head of the radius, and the lower end. Okay, so we have the styloid process, and of course here comes the ulnar notch that articulates the head of the ulna, and the facets. So these facets that articulates with the scaphoid. So then comes the scaphoid and the triquetral. So and lunate. So thereby it forms the radiocarpal joints. Okay, so the upper end of the radius that articulates with the capitulum of the humerus, thereby forming the humeroradial articulation of the elbow. Okay, so just below this, so there comes the constriction, what is called neck of the radius. The neck of the radius, so it is very important bony landmark. So where the important event that takes place, the brachial artery, it bifurcates into radial and ulnar artery at the level of neck of the radius. So just below the neck there is a tuberosity, radial tuberosity, that receives the biceps brachiae insertion. So the head is very important, the head that lies within the annular ligaments, which is attached to the radial notch of the ulna. So you can see, so this is how the annular ligament. So that's the reason this is variety. The variety of the joint is pivot joint. Okay, pivot variety. So what is the joint going to form here is a superior radio-ulnar joint. What is this called? Superior radio-ulnar joint. The superior radio-ulnar joint. Okay, so the head within the annular ligament, and the annular ligament which is attached to the radial notch of the ulna. Thereby forming superior radio-ulnar joint. Okay, so that's about the upper aspect, the upper end of the radius, and the lower end. So mainly. So the lower end has got anterior smooth surface and the posterior rough surface. The ventral or anterior smooth surface, the posterior or dorsal rough surface. So that is because of the tendons of the extensor digitorum, and so that makes the tubercles over there, and the prominent tubercle, what is called Lister's tubercle. So that's why all these tubercles that makes the lower end of the humerus, okay, mainly the dorsal surface, which is rough, and the anterior surface is smooth. So the smooth anterior surface or the ventral surface, where you can feel the pulsations of the radial artery against the ventral smooth surface of the lower end of the radius. And so very important notch you can see here. This is called the ulnar notch, where the head of the ulna that articulates here, thereby forming inferior radio-ulnar joint. So come to the shaft of the humerus. So we have the shaft is it will convex towards the lateral aspect. It is laterally convex, and medial it is concave, and that tends to the sharp border, what is called medial border. So otherwise called interosseous border, that gives attachment to the interosseous membrane, thereby it forms the intermediate radio-ulnar joint. Okay, so that's about the shaft. and we have, apart from the medial borders, we have anterior border and the posterior border. Okay, so that's about the borders of the shaft of the radius. Okay, mainly the medial border, anterior border. So from the anterior surface, we have the lateral surface and the posterior surface. Okay, so that's about the radius bone. Go through the Colles fracture, the lower end of the shaft. Okay, so the fracture is called the Colles fracture, and the head, the dislocations of the head is common in the children because of the head is not fitted properly in the annular ligament. Okay, so that's about the radius bone. So the next bone of the forearm, so we have ulna. So here comes the ulna. So the ulna, again, it is a long bone, so presenting upper end, lower end, of course intervening shaft. Okay, so the upper end of the ulna is very easy to identify. So that presents mainly a hook-like appearance, what is called olecranon process. You can see here olecranon process, and just in front of that there is one more what is called one more process, what is called coronoid process. In between these two there is a notch called what is called trochlear notch. So what is this notch here? So this is trochlear notch, this is olecranon process and coronoid process. With the help of these two processes, you can identify the upper end of the ulna. Okay, so apart from the olecranon process, coronoid process, the upper end mainly presents a notch here. So this notch is called the radial notch, where the annular ligament is attached here. So within the annular ligament, so you have a head of the radius, thereby forming superior radioulnar joint. The formation of the superior radioulnar joint, it is close vicinity to the elbow joint. Okay, elbow joint. Of course, the trochlear notch of the ulna articulates the trochlea of the lower end of the humerus, thereby forming a humero-ulnar articulation of the elbow joint. So just close to the ulnar notch, so there comes the attachment to the supinator crest, and also we have the tuberosity here, what is called ulnar tuberosity in front of the coronoid process, what is called ulnar tuberosity, that gives attachment to the brachialis muscle. Okay, and coming to the lower end of the ulna, so you can see the lower end of the ulna, so that shows a styloid process. You can see here this is the styloid process, and what is this called? The lower end of the ulna is called as head of the ulna. Okay, so in case of radius, the upper end is called head, but in case of ulna, the lower end is called head. Okay, the head of the ulna, it articulates with the ulnar notch or the lower end of the radius, thereby forming an inferior radioulnar joint. Okay, so the ulna doesn't take part in the formation of the wrist joint, what is called radiocarpal joint. Of course, the head is because it is separated from the articulation of the radiocarpal by means of the articular disc. So thereby it is not considered, the ulna doesn't take part in the formation of the radiocarpal joint, what is called wrist joint. Okay, so that's about the lower end. Okay, so you can see here the styloid process, and the lower end is very important, what is called head of the ulna. Head of the ulna is lower end. Okay, and here comes the upper end. Coming to the shaft of the ulna, mainly presents. Okay, so we have the lateral sharp border. The lateral border of the ulna is sharp, but in case of the radius, the medial border is sharp. Because that is lateral bone, this is medial bone. So the lateral border of the ulna is sharp, that is called intraosseous border. So thereby it gives attachment to the intraosseous membrane. So apart from that, so we have anterior border, the posterior border. So the ulna, the shaft of the ulna, it shows medial convexity, and of course the lateral concavity. So it is quite opposite to the radius bone. Okay, so that's about the shaft of the ulna. So here comes the olecranon process, the tip of the olecranon process. Of course, there comes the attachment of the triceps brachii, and the brachialis here, the supinator muscle. Okay, this side the supinator crest. Of course, this area that is by the flexor digitorum profundus, and here comes, you can see here, this is called pronator quadratus, origin of the pronator quadratus. Okay, so that's briefly about the ulna. Okay, so the ulna, and so this ulna, it belongs to the right side. Okay, it belongs to the right side. So this anatomical position, always remember. So the sharp lateral border. Okay, and this upper end presenting the olecranon process and coronoid process. The lower end, so it is called head. Okay, so you can articulate as these bones belongs to the same side, you can articulate the radius and ulna. So the radius is also it belongs to the right side, and you can see here. So this is the lower end, so articulating with the head of the ulna that lies within the ulnar notch, and here comes the radial notch, which gives attachment to the annular ligament. So within the annular ligaments, we have the head of the radius. So this is the articulation, and of course the axis for the these two, okay, the movements, what is called the supination pronation that takes place at these joints. We have superior radial ulnar, inferior radial ulnar. So the axis is that obliquely passes from the head of the radius to the head of the ulna, Okay, so that's about the articulation of the superior, intermediate, and inferior radial ulnar joints. So with the help of these three joints, these two bones are articulated each other. Okay, the radius and ulna, the bones of the forearm. Okay, so go through the textbooks, read in detail about the Colles fracture, Smith's fracture. Okay, in the textbook. So next, coming to the hand, the bones of the hand. Of course, you know the bones of the hand consist of carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So we have the carpals that they are arranged in the two rows. Okay, so this the articulated hand. Okay, so we have the carpals. So the first row of the carpals we have from lateral to medial. So you know the scaphoid, then followed by the lunate, then comes the triquetral. Of course, just above the triquetral, so we have the pisiform bone. Okay, and of course the next distal row of the carpals we have okay, the trapezium. Okay, then comes the trapezoid, then comes the capitate, then comes the hamate. Okay, so the trapezium, it articulates with the metacarpal. The first metacarpal, they are forming a very important joint there, the joint of thumb, what is called first carpometacarpal joint of thumb. Okay, so that is about the significance of the trapezium. And coming to the scaphoid is a boat-shaped bone. So you can easily identify the scaphoid presenting the tubercle laterally. Okay, so laterally it presents a tubercle, and it is a boat-shaped bone. Scaphoid is boat-shaped bone. And next comes the triquetral, lunate. The lunate, which is a crescent shape. The lunate is a crescent shaped bone. So followed the scaphoid, followed by the lunate, and then comes the triquetral. So the triquetral is a pyramidal shaped bone. So just above the triquetral, so we have a pisiform, which is a example for the sesamoid bone, pisiform. Okay, it is P-like, P-shaped bone, what is called pisiform. Okay, so that's about the bones of the proximal row. Coming to the distal row, so already we discussed about the trapezium. So the crest of the trapezium. Okay, so it presents crest and also the groove. Okay, so with the help of the crest and the grooves, you can identify the trapezium. Okay, so followed by the trapezoid. The trapezoid, of course, is quadrangular shaped bone. Okay, it is a quadrangular shaped bone, and followed by the capitate. The capitate presents the big head. That's why it's called capitate, and it is the largest bone among all the carpals. Capitate. The capitate followed by the hamate. So with the help of the hook, you can identify the hamate. The hook of the hamate, of course, that gives attachment to the flexor retinaculum. So this side comes the tubercle of the scaphoid and crest of the trapezium laterally. So medially we have the hook of the hamate. So all these bones that gives attachment to flexor retinaculum, attachment is very important. Short notes: flexor retinaculum and the crest of the trapezium, tubercle of the scaphoid laterally. Of course, this side comes the hook of the hamate. So that's about the carpal bones. You can see here all the carpal bones, the scaphoid, lunate, and of course triquetral. So these three bones that articulates with the lower end of the radius. Of course, they were forming radiocarpal joint. Okay, so that's about the commonly called wrist joint, the formation of the radiocarpal joint. So is it clear for you? So the distal row, the proximal row, and the distal row. So total, how many carpals we have? 8 carpals. Okay, so 4 in the proximal and 4 in the distal. Okay, so the largest bone is capitate. The largest bone is capitate because it presents a big head. That's why it's called capitate. Okay, trapezium, trapezoid, followed by the capitate, and then comes the hamate. Okay, so that's about the carpals. The carpals followed by the metacarpals. You can see the metacarpal bones here. So all the 5 metacarpals. The first metacarpal is very important. It has got a unique features. Of course, it is the shortest among all the 5 metals. Among the 5 metacarpals, the shortest one is and the strongest one is the first metacarpal bone. Okay, of course, the fractures of the base of the metacarpal, the first metacarpal is called Bennett's fracture. Bennett's fractures. Okay, so all the metacarpals that presents so we have the proximal end and the distal end. The proximal ends are called bases, the distal ends are called heads. Okay, so of course the heads of the metacarpals, so otherwise called so they are prominent on what is called the knuckles. You can see the knuckles here. So all the knuckles, all the heads of the metacarpals are the distal ends of the metacarpals that forms the knuckles. The knuckles have been formed by the heads of the metatarsals. Okay, so the peculiarity mainly, so it is most anteriorly placed. Okay, among the 5 metacarpals, the first metacarpal is placed a little anteriorly, and it is not articulating with the the other metacarpals, like if you take the medial 4 metacarpals that articulate each other, but so the first metacarpal, it doesn't articulate with the second metacarpal, so that is the reason it produces the free movements at the thumb joint, okay, thumb joint, and of course it is placed opposite to the other 4 metacarpals also, 4 metacarpals, that means opposite or anterior to the 4 metacarpals. See like this. So this is one plane and this is one plane, okay. So that is called juxta in position, okay, juxta in position. Of course this is freely movable. If you take the other carpo-metacarpal joints, they are immobile, okay, but the first carpo-metacarpal joint, it is freely movable, okay. I hope you know the movements at the first carpo-metacarpal joint. So that is the reason it is placed most anteriorly or juxta to the other 4 metacarpals, and it is not articulated with the other bones also. Of course, this is modified first phalanx. The first metacarpal bone is modified, the first phalanx. Of course, we have 3 phalanges to the second digit onwards, but here this is considered as the modification of the first phalanx, because the thumb has got only 2 phalanges. We have proximal phalanx, distal phalanx. So that is also the unique feature of the metacarpal bone, and the fractures are called Bennett's fracture. So usually it takes place at the time of boxing, okay. So the fracture at the base of the first metacarpal is called Bennett's fracture. So remember these clinical aspects. That's about the metacarpals. Hope all the metacarpals, the palmar surface is concave. And the dorsal surface, of course, it is convex. Okay, all the heads that articulates with the phalanges. You can see the phalanges here. So from the second digit onwards, we have 3 phalanges. There is proximal phalanx, intermediate phalanx, and distal phalanx. So by means of the interphalangeal joints, of course, the heads of the metacarpal bones that articulates with the phalanges by means of metacarpophalangeal joints. So just try to remember the lumbricals. That is very important. So it has got the flexion at the metacarpophalangeal and the extension at the interphalangeal joints. So what are those muscles? Lumbricals. So that is about the articulated hand. Of course, all the carpals, they are articulated by means of intercarpal joints. Okay. So thereby forming the articulated hand. So consisting of these bones, the bones of the hand. We have carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. Okay. Hope that is clear for you. Articulated hand and how to identify each carpal bone. So with the help of the shape and the important features. So we have for the scaphoid, we have the tubercle. Of course, it is boat shaped, and for the capitate, which is presenting the big head. Okay. And if you take the trapezium, it's very important. It presents the crest of the trapezium, and groove, of course. Okay. That's about the carpal bones, the metacarpals, and altogether articulated head. Okay. And thereby we hope covered all the bones of upper limb. So go through the textbook and read in detail. Just recollect and prepare. Okay, it is a preparation for your coming internal assessment examination. So that's about the revision of upper limb bones. Thank you for your patience listening.